Sergeant Elias Harland, a 34-year-old American tomb guard at Arlington, walked out of the barracks as twilight descended over Washington, D.C., the weight of his ceremonial M14 rifle pressed against his shoulder, and the faint scent of gun oil clung to his white gloves. His crisp blue dress uniform, polished brass buttons, and razor-creased trousers gleamed under the last touch of amber light. He had just completed his shift guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier, 21 steps of silence and precision, repeated countless times. For most people, it was the end of a workday. For Elias, it was the closing of a vow. His brother Tommy, a Marine who never returned from Afghanistan, was the reason he guarded the unknowns, because Tommy had become one of them. Tonight, Elias wanted nothing but a quiet meal before returning to his quarters. He stepped into the Lexington, an elegant restaurant filled with glittering chandeliers, whispering conversations, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Heads turned. Murmurs spread like ripples. A man in full military dress, entering a world of designer suits and silk dresses, looked almost alien. Near the counter, a tall waitress with auburn hair, Victoria Lang, lifted an eyebrow. Sir, are you coming from some ceremony?" she asked, tone half teasing, half doubtful. Her nama tag shimmered under the warm light as she led him to a corner table, clearly expecting him to order quickly and leave. Elias removed his cap, placed it gently beside his plate, and gave a polite nod. "Just dinner, ma'am," he said. His deep voice carried quiet discipline. But Victoria chuckled under her breath. "That rifle's not real, right? We don't allow props in here." The restaurant laughed softly. A few patrons turned back to their meals, smirking. Elias's jaw tightened, not from anger, but from the restraint drilled into every guard who'd ever stood watch. He could almost hear his commanding officer's voice. "Hold your bearing, Harland, always." Moments later, an older man at a nearby table glanced up from his drink. His sharp eyes studied Elias's uniform, the white gloves, the insignia, the polished shoes. The man's back straightened as recognition struck him. "Son," he said, standing, "that's the uniform of the tomb guard, isn't it?" The chatter in the room dimmed. Victoria froze. Elias nodded quietly. "Yes, sir." The older man, a retired colonel, his medals faintly gleaming under the restaurant light, saluted him with respect. Silence swept through the room like a tide. Even the pianist missed a note. Elias did not gloat or scold. He simply returned the salute and whispered, "I just came for dinner." Yet in that moment, the entire restaurant felt the gravity behind his words, that the uniform wasn't costume and the rifle wasn't for show. It represented men and women who never returned home. Victoria's smirk vanished. Her eyes lowered, voice trembling. I'm sorry, Sergeant. I didn't know." Elias offered a small, tired smile. "Most people don't, but that's why we stand guard." As the colonel placed a hand on his shoulder, the room remained still, a rare silence of reverence. Elias finally took his first bite, not just of food, but of peace. Outside, rain began to patter softly against the windows, a quiet echo of the salute that lived in his heart. For several moments after the salute, the restaurant remained utterly still. The clatter of cutlery ceased, voices died, and even the soft jazz from the corner pianist faltered mid-note. Every pair of eyes followed the man in blue, the soldier who had said so little, yet spoken volumes through his restraint. Elias sat down again, hands folded neatly in front of him. He wasn't angry. He had seen disrespect before, from strangers, from tourists who thought the tomb was just another attraction. But what stung most wasn't the laughter. It was the ignorance behind it. People no longer understood why the guard never flinched, never smiled, never broke formation. Victoria Lang stood near the counter, heart pounding. Her earlier smirk burned into shame. She hadn't meant to mock, not really. But the uniform had looked like theater, like something out of a parade. Now she realized it was closer to a shroud. She swallowed hard and approached his table again, voice soft. "Would you like some coffee, Sergeant?" "On the house." Elias looked up. "That's kind of you," he said, his tone still formal but not cold. "Black, please." When she brought it over, she hesitated. "I didn't know who you were," she whispered. My brother served too. He was with the 82nd Airborne. We lost him in 2010. Elias's gaze softened. He lowered his head slightly, the gesture of one soldier acknowledging another's loss. "Then you know what the silence means." Victoria nodded, her eyes glassy. "I'd forgotten," she said quietly. At a nearby table, the retired colonel cleared his throat. "Miss Lang," he said gently, "you've just met one of only a few who stand in rain, snow and heat, day and night, to guard the unknowns. Men who never came home." Elias turned slightly toward the colonel. "We don't guard a tomb," he said softly. "We guard the promise that they'll never be forgotten." The colonel smiled faintly, pride hidden in his lined face. "You carry that promise well, Sergeant." Around the room, whispers began again, but this time they were words of respect, not ridicule. One patron raised his glass silently. Another woman dabbed her eyes. The pianist, red-faced, resumed playing, shifting into a slow, reverent melody. Outside, the rain thickened, streaking the tall windows like falling tears. The reflection of Elias's uniform shimmered against the glass, blue and white against the gray night. He finished his meal quietly, paid his bill, and stood to leave. As he stepped toward the exit, Victoria called after him. "Sergeant!" He turned. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once, then walked out into the rain, his posture straight, his steps even 21 paces from door to curb. The same rhythm he kept at the tomb, behind him. The Lexington was no longer the same restaurant. The silence he left behind wasn't awkward or cold. It was reverent, a silence that finally understood its meaning. The rain followed, Sergeant Elias Harland all the way back to Arlington. The steady rhythm against his cap felt almost like a drumbeat, soft, relentless, eternal. Washington streets glistened under amber streetlights, and each drop mirrored the flicker of headlights passing through the mist. When he reached the iron gates of Arlington National Cemetery, the world outside seemed to dissolve. Inside the gates, there was no laughter, no music, no sound of plates or chatter. Only silence, the kind that wrapped around you and made your heartbeat seem too loud. Elias passed the security post, saluted the guard on duty, and walked along the cobblestone path toward the tomb. Every footstep echoed between the marble walls. The torch lamps flickered under the drizzle, casting golden streaks across his dark uniform. Before him, the tomb of the unknown soldier loomed, simple, white, immovable. The words etched into stone glowed faintly under the rain. "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." Elias paused before stepping into formation. He inhaled slowly, the cold rain soaking through the brim of his cap. Somewhere behind him, the city continued to live, people drinking, laughing, forgetting. But not here. Not ever here. He set the M14 across his shoulder and began the 21 steps, precise, measured, identical to every one before it. 21 seconds of stillness, a turn, then 21 steps back. His mind drifted briefly, not away from duty, but deeper into it. He thought of Tommy, his younger brother, whose dog tags were buried with sand instead of a body. Tommy had wanted to be a guard too. He used to joke that Elias was too serious, too disciplined. "You look like you're guarding God himself," Tommy once laughed. That memory, as bright as sunlight, cut through the night rain. "Forward." "March," Elias whispered under his breath, not to himself, but to the memory beside him. He didn't hear the approaching footsteps until another guard came into view. Private Logan Pierce, fresh-faced, maybe 21. "Evening, Sergeant," the young man said, voice uncertain. Didn't expect you back so soon. Couldn't sleep, Elias replied, eyes still on the tomb. Pierce nodded, shivering slightly under the cold. They say standing here changes a man. Elias finally turned toward him. No, he said quietly. It reminds you of who you already were. The younger guard fell silent. Together, they resumed their watch. Two shadows in the rain, two sentinels guarding a promise older than themselves. The rain grew heavier, drumming softly on their helmets, running down their faces, but neither moved an inch. Hours later, when dawn began to bleed through the clouds, Elias looked up. The gray sky glowed faintly with the light of morning. For a moment, he imagined Tommy smiling somewhere beyond the fog. He straightened his posture, gave one last salute to the tomb, and whispered, "Rest easy, brother. I'll take the next watch." By the time the sun broke through the clouds, the rain had stopped. The cemetery shimmered with quiet silver light, every blade of grass jeweled with water, every marble headstone shining like polished bone. Sergeant Elias Harland stood at his post, still as the tomb itself. His uniform clung damply to his frame, but his eyes were clear and steady. A soft breeze brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and cedar. From down the path, footsteps echoed, not the rhythm of a changing guard, but slower, heavier, deliberate. Elias turned his head slightly and saw a tall figure approaching, dressed not in uniform blues, but in the starched green of the U.S. Army Class A service coat. 4 stars gleamed on each shoulder. Elias instantly straightened, saluting sharply. "Good morning, sir." The general returned the salute with quiet precision. His face bore the weathering of decades, lines carved by war, by loss, and by the burden of command. "At ease, Sergeant Harland," he said. His voice carried authority, but underneath, there was warmth. The general's name was General Marcus Ellison, retired now, but a legend among soldiers. Elias recognized him immediately. His portrait still hung in the halls of the Pentagon. "I heard about what happened at the restaurant," Ellison began, his gaze fixed on the tomb. "A friend of mine was there. Said a man in uniform reminded everyone what respect really means." Elias didn't respond. His jaw tensed slightly. "Just did what anyone would, sir." The general gave a soft laugh, low and tired. "No, Sergeant. Not anyone would. Most people keep their heads down. You didn't." They stood side by side in silence for a while. The wind carried the faint sound of a distant bugle, perhaps a rehearsal from the old guard's barracks. The melody twisted through the morning air like smoke. "Do you know why I came here today?" Ellison asked finally. Elias shook his head. "I came to lay a wreath," the general said, gesturing to the folded bundle in his arm. "For my son. He never made it home from Kandahar." He hesitated, then looked directly at Elias. "You remind me of him." The words hung in the air like fog. Elias blinked, feeling something tighten in his throat. "I'm honored, sir." The general nodded, stepping forward toward the tomb. Together, the two men placed the wreath against the cold marble. The petals glistened, red, white, and blue, bleeding softly into the morning light. When Ellison rose again, he didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly he said, "The public saw a soldier being insulted. But I saw something else. I saw a man who carried the dignity of every name carved into this ground." He turned to face Elias. "The Army could use more men like you." Elias hesitated, then replied, "The Army already has them, sir. They're right here, watching over those who can't stand guard anymore." The general's expression softened. He extended his hand. Elias shook it firmly, the kind of handshake that meant respect shared between equals, not by rank, but by sacrifice. A light drizzle began again, but this time, Elias didn't mind. The air felt lighter, the silence gentler. As the general walked away down the long marble path, Elias resumed his post, rifle steady, eyes forward, behind him. The wreath swayed slightly in the breeze, a small, living color against the white stone dot, and for the first time in a long while, Elias felt peace. He whispered, barely audible, "Duty ends when the last salute fades, but honor never does." 2 weeks had passed since the encounter at the restaurant. The story of the tomb guard had spread quietly but steadily, shared from one soldier to another, whispered in veterans' halls, and eventually printed in a Sunday column that reached far beyond Arlington's gates. Sergeant Elias Harland had not sought any attention. He continued his duty with the same quiet dignity, his boots clicking against the wet marble with unwavering rhythm. Rain or shine, he remained steady as the marble itself. One crisp morning, as the sun climbed over the eastern ridge, Elias was called to the guard quarters. On the wooden desk lay a sealed white envelope, embossed with the golden insignia of the White House. His superior, Captain Reynolds, simply nodded. "It's for you." Elias hesitated for a moment before taking it. The wax seal glimmered faintly. His calloused fingers broke it open. Inside was a letter, printed neatly on thick paper. He read slowly, his lips barely moving. "Sergeant Harland, your recent actions remind us that true honor is not performed under the lights of ceremony, but in the quiet moments when no one is watching. You stood for respect when it was least convenient, and in doing so, you reminded us of what our flag truly means. On behalf of a grateful nation, I extend my deepest respect and appreciation. The President of the United States." Elias exhaled softly. He folded the letter once, twice, and placed it carefully back in the envelope. For a long moment, he simply stood there, listening, the faint rustle of the American flag outside, the echo of footsteps from another changing of the guard. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Later that afternoon, as the ceremony began again, tourists gathered in reverent silence. Cameras were lowered. The air felt heavier, sacred. Elias marched forward, each step precise, deliberate, measured. The crowd didn't know his name, and he preferred it that way. To them, he was simply the tomb guard, faceless, timeless, the embodiment of every soldier who had ever taken an oath to protect something greater than himself. As he turned sharply on his heel, rifle glinting under the sun, a young boy near the railing saluted clumsily. Elias's eyes met his for a fraction of a second. He returned the salute, perfect and crisp. The boy's mother whispered, "That's what a real soldier looks like." And though the words barely reached him, Elias felt them settle deep in his chest. When the ceremony ended, he stood still for a moment longer than usual. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished marble before him, a man, alone, yet never lonely. In the distance, the flag above Arlington swayed gently in the wind. Elias whispered a quiet promise only the dead could hear. "As long as one stands watch, none of you are forgotten." Then he resumed his post, steady, silent, eternal. The sun was sinking low over Arlington, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The air was cool now, the kind that carried both memory and silence. Sergeant Elias Harland stood by the steps, his shift finally ending. He had performed his last walk for the day, his boots still gleaming, his movements sharp as ever. The world had changed around him, but his rhythm never had. As he removed his gloves, another soldier approached, young, lean, face unlined by time. His name tag read Mitchell. Barely 20, his voice carried both respect and nervousness. "Permission to relieve the guard, sir." Elias nodded slowly. Permission granted. The ritual began, crisp, sacred, unchanged for decades. Each motion mirrored perfection. The inspection of the rifle, the synchronized turns, the silent salute. Elias watched as the young soldier stepped into position, his movements exact yet still searching for weight, for meaning. When it was done, Elias handed over the post with steady hands. "Take care of them," he said quietly, eyes flicking toward the tomb. Mitchell swallowed hard, nodding. "Always, sir." For a moment, the two men stood side by side, generations apart, yet bound by the same unspoken vow. Behind them, the marble walls reflected the last light of day. Warm, fleeting, eternal dot as Elias stepped back. The faint echo of taps drifted across the cemetery. Somewhere, a bugler was playing for another fallen soldier. The notes rose and fell like breath, mournful, proud, infinite. He paused halfway down the path and turned back. The young guard now stood alone before the tomb, motionless except for the wind tugging gently at his sleeve. The torch had been passed wordlessly perfectly. Elias looked up toward the horizon. The flag above Arlington fluttered against the dying light, its fabric glowing in the sunset. He removed his hat, holding it over his heart. In that moment, he wasn't just a man. He was every soldier who had ever stood watch. Every promise ever kept, he whispered to the evening air. Time changes everything, ... except duty. Then, as the sky deepened into violet, Elias turned and walked away, boots echoing softly on the marble. Each step faded into the dusk, steady, certain, eternal ... and behind him, the guard continued, one life ending, another beginning, the silence of the tomb unbroken. The sun was long gone by the time Private Daniel Mitchell took his first full shift at the tomb. The air was cool, thick with the quiet weight that only night brings to Arlington. Above, the stars shimmered faintly through drifting clouds, and the American flag whispered in the wind, a low, steady rhythm that matched the beat of his heart. He stood perfectly still, rifle resting along his shoulder, every breath measured, every few minutes. He could hear the echo of his own boots as he paced, turned, and returned, the same sacred path walked by hundreds before him. But tonight, it felt different. He wasn't just guarding marble. He was guarding memory. The silence pressed close. Yet it wasn't empty. It was alive. The air carried whispers, the faint trace of boots on gravel, distant salutes, prayers left behind by grieving families. Mitchell could almost feel them, the presence of the fallen, unseen but never absent. He thought of Sergeant Elias Harland, the man he'd relieved just hours before. The older guard's words replayed quietly in his mind. Take care of them. At the time, he had only nodded. Now standing alone under the stars, he understood. His uniform felt heavier, not because of fabric, but because of meaning. The rifle was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of vigilance, of promise. Each step he took was a conversation between generations. From the barracks, the faint light of a lantern flickered through the mist. Somewhere far beyond, the city still lived, cars, laughter, music, but none of it reached here. The tomb existed outside of time. Midway through his watch, the wind shifted. A soft drizzle began to fall, blurring the shine of the marble beneath his boots. He didn't move, didn't flinch. The raindrops clung to his hat, slid down his face, and vanished into the silence. In that stillness, he remembered the story. The one whispered among the guards. A soldier once stood up in a restaurant when others turned away. A man who refused to be disrespected, not for himself, but for the uniform he wore. And that man had once stood right here. Mitchell felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from pride. He whispered softly, "Sir, I won't let them down." The words faded into the night, carried away by the wind. When dawn finally began to paint the horizon, the rain eased. The first rays of light broke over the marble, scattering across the wet surface like silver fire. Mitchell remained motionless, his silhouette cast in pale gold. And for the first time, he truly understood what Elias had meant. This was not just a duty. It was a vow whispered by every soldier who had ever stood the watch. A vow to remember those who could not speak anymore. A vow that would outlive them all. The next morning, Michael arrived at the bank earlier than usual. The memory of yesterday's humiliation lingered, but so did the quiet respect he'd earned from the customers. As he stood at the entrance, the first light of dawn shimmered on the glass doors. His uniform was spotless, his posture straight, his jaw set with renewed purpose. Inside, whispers rippled through the staff. "That's him," someone murmured. The guard who stood up to the manager. Even the tellers who once avoided eye contact now greeted him with soft smiles. Then, the bank manager walked in, his expression tight, hiding embarrassment beneath forced professionalism. For a tense moment, their eyes met. The air seemed to still. But instead of confrontation, the manager gave a curt nod. "Morning, officer." Michael returned the nod, his voice calm but firm. "Morning, sir." It wasn't forgiveness nor an apology, but it was respect, the kind that couldn't be demanded, only earned. As the day began, a young woman entered the bank, the same one who had witnessed the entire incident. She approached him shyly and handed him a small folded note. "For standing up for what's right," she whispered, then walked away. Michael opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten line. "Honor doesn't need a uniform, it needs a heart." He smiled faintly, tucking the note into his pocket as sunlight flooded through the glass, casting a golden glow across the marble floor. The world outside kept moving, but for a moment, everything felt still. Peaceful. For the first time in a long while, Michael didn't just feel like a guard. He felt like a man who had reclaimed his dignity.